I talk to a lot of businesses that have attempted to deploy SharePoint and it's gone horribly wrong. People are just not adopting it. And usually that's because it has not been set up or designed properly from the start, and people have not been given the right training on how to use Microsoft SharePoint. So follow along with me. I'm going to show you how to design, implement and deploy SharePoint in your business, covering all of the basics. Now we are going to get stuck straight into the hands-on demonstration, but first I want to quickly talk about planning, because if you don't get the planning right from the start, you're wasting your time with this whole project because it's not going to work. You don't need to massively overcomplicate your planning. In this scenario, we are setting up a SharePoint site for a small construction company. So I have sat down with the different department leaders all together, put them all together in a room, and we have mapped out this site structure. We have worked out a structure that works for everybody. So we've decided in this case that a business function-led approach to the SharePoint site structure works best for this business. So we've got a homepage with some shared resources like stationery, i.e. company letterhead documents, and a general kind of intranet page all about the company with some useful information for the staff. So that is going to be a public site, which is open to everybody. We've then got a project site, which is going to be restricted, a sales site, which is going to be restricted, and an account site, which is going to be restricted. Now, within these sites, these little boxes underneath those sites are document libraries, which are top-level folders. So we have got this clients folder and templates folder, and these are going to be just inheriting permissions from the site. So whoever's got access to the project site will also have access to these folders. However, on the accounts site, the accounts team have told me that generally everyone in accounts will have access to everything except payroll, which is highly restricted. So the year-to-date accounts folder is going to be accessible to everyone that's got access to the account site, but the payroll folder, we're going to break permissions inheritance, and that is going to have unique permissions applied to it so that only certain people in the accounts team will have access. We then got the HR site, which is something a bit different. So HR team have told me that they would actually like to open up their site to the wider business to display some really useful information for staff about HR platforms and company policies, all that exciting stuff on their SharePoint site, but they don't want everyone having access to their data. So the personnel folder and the recruitment folder is going to be locked down and only the HR team will have access to those, but policies and the homepage on the site will be accessible to everybody. So we're going to build this out. I then put together a Microsoft Planner board just to help me plan the high-level tasks and make sure I don't miss anything. So the first thing we've got is planning with stakeholders. So we've all got together and agreed the structure as we looked at here. But not only that, we've also agreed how SharePoint is going to be used. Now, I've created a really useful video on our YouTube channel, which explains when to use each Microsoft 365 app and helps you to decide that as a business. So let's get stuck in with the setup. And by the way, if you subscribe to the channel and drop me a message on LinkedIn or an email showing me that you've subscribed, I'll give you a link to attend a free live interactive course where you can follow along with me as I build a SharePoint site and you can have a go at doing it for yourself. So the link to my LinkedIn profile and my email address is in the video description below. So onto my task, I'm going to tick off planning with stakeholders. The first thing we've got here is building the hub site. So I'm going to go to Microsoft365.com. Now you'll need to be either a global administrator or a SharePoint administrator to access the SharePoint Admin Center. So I'm going to click on admin. I'm going to click show all. And then I'm going to click SharePoint on the bottom left-hand side. Okay, and if we click on active sites, you can have a look at the sites that you've already got here to make sure you're not about to duplicate anything, or maybe you've already got something that you can work on rather than starting again. But I'm going to start again here and click create. We've got a couple of options here, but generally for a hub site, your hub site is going to be your home page. It's going to be the first thing that people land on when they come to SharePoint. It's going to link everything together, kind of similar to a homepage on a website. So I'm going to use communication site, which is generally best for a hub site. And we've got all kinds of templates here that you can pick from. I'm going to use the standard communication template, but you can pick whatever you like, whatever works best for you, depending on what you're going to be putting on your homepage and what kind of design and look and feel that you like. So let's click on this, and I can preview that site if I want to, but I'm just going to press Use Template and give it a name. Now, really important with your SharePoint sites that you don't overcomplicate it and use really long names. For the hub site or the homepage, I usually call this the hub, so I'm just going to call this hub. It's nice and short, and you do actually have to keep in mind that this is a website, and if you're going to save files to this site, the longer it is, the longer the file path is going to be. And if you have really long file paths, just like in a Windows file server, you eventually are going to hit that character limit in Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word. So keep the site address short. I've already got a hub site that I've created before. So I'm just going to call this Data Hub. And I can give this a description. And I can set a site owner. Now, the site owner is generally going to be the person that's in charge of that site, has full access to manage the permissions for the site, to edit that site, and make decisions about who else have access to that site. That could be IT, or maybe you've nominated someone else in the company for that role. But for now, I'm going to give myself that role because I am building this site, and it's helpful during the build process to be set up as the owner. And I'm going to click Next. Make sure you set your time zone. So I am in London, I've gone past it, there it is, okay, and create site. Now you can actually set the time zone, the default time zone within the settings in the 365 Admin Center, so you're not setting this on each site. So once that's finished creating, I'll show you how to do that, okay. So if we click on settings, we have then got site creation settings, and we've got a couple of options here. So I'm gonna set the default time zone to London. Lost it again, there it is. Now the other thing you can set here is whether other people can create SharePoint sites. I would strongly recommend turning that off. You don't want your end users to have access to create SharePoint sites, and you don't want them to have access to create teams either. And there is a way to turn off their ability to create teams using PowerShell. So let's untick that and stop people creating rogue SharePoint sites that haven't been set up properly. And let's click Save. Okay, so now the next time I create a site, it's going to automatically use that time zone. So let's go back to Active Sites. And we've got our Data Hub here. So if I tick that, and at the top there, I can set that to be a hub site. So a hub site, again, is kind of the central hub of all of your SharePoint sites. It brings everything together using a common navigation structure and a common theme. Okay, so now I'm going to register this as a hub site. So I need to tick it. And at the top there, we click Hub and then Register as Hub Site. So I'm going to give that a different name to my other hub, Data Hub, and click Save. So now if I click on that URL there, it's going to take me into my newly created SharePoint hub page. So if you've ever used WordPress before, this is kind of similar to using WordPress. You can just edit the page and drag and drop different web parts on or off the page. So the first thing to point out is that the page is divided up into different sections. So we've got a full width section at the top here. We've then got one big section here. If you want to create a new section, you just go between sections, and we can see we've got a little plus option there, and we can decide how we want to lay that out. So we've got the full width section, which we've got in use at the top there. 3 columns, 2 columns. You can have a vertical column. So if you want a kind of panel on the right there, you can do that. You can just hover over a section and press to delete it. So again, this section, if I wanted to delete that, I could just press delete here. So let's get rid of that. I kind of like these. These are called hero web parts, and you can customize these by clicking on it, and then in the top left, I can change the layout here. So I can change that to carousel. I can change that to layers. I can change that to tiles. The best thing to do is just play around with it, but talk to the business, ask them how they want this laid out, ask them what they want to appear on this homepage, and then you can play around with the web parts to try and work out the best way to deliver the design that they have asked for. So within most of these web parts, if you're using images or text or whatever else, you can edit the details or the properties of that part. And on the right-hand side here, we can change images, we can change links, we can change the header text. So I can change that to welcome to ABC Construction. learn more. So that link could take us off to another page within this SharePoint site. So let me just show you how to create a new page on this site. So if I click republish, and if I click on pages here, I can click on new and new site page. So that's not creating a new SharePoint site, that's just creating another web page on this existing site. So let's create a page called About ABC Construction. And let's just get rid of this. So I can change the look and feel of the banner at the top there. So I can change that where it says image and title to be a color block or plain or fade, all kinds of different designs really. You just play around with whatever works best for you. But ultimately, you need to get feedback from the business and decide what they like and how they want this to look. You can toggle comments on or off at the bottom. So I don't want people commenting on this. If I click the plus there, I can add different web parts. But the first thing I'm probably going to want to do is just think about how this is going to be laid out. So if I want an image on the left-hand side and text on the right-hand side, I need to create a new section. So I'm going to create a 1/3 left section, which means the left section is going to be about 1/3 of the screen and the right section is going to be 2/3. And then I can put my image there. So if I click plus, click on image, and you can either upload an image by clicking on upload, you can do a web search, or you can look at their stock images. In most cases, what I would usually do is just fill a stock image and then go back to the business and perhaps ask the marketing team what kind of images they would like to use. So I'm going to just search for construction. There we go. I'm not going to overthink this too much. Let's just pick that one and click insert. And we've got our image there, and I can now click plus here and just type text. There we go. And I'm going to create a heading there. 100 years of excellence. Okay. And then you can create your text here. So we have been blah, blah, blah. So there we go. So we've got some text, and now I can add another section here if I want a different layout. So I can go with just a single column or a full page section. So I'm going to create another column there and click on plus. I can create buttons, call to actions, image library. So I'm going to create an image gallery here, click on that. And I can, if I've got a document library on my site with a load of images, I can set it to dynamically display images from a document library. So I just need to select the name of that library, or I can just upload some images here. I can click on add images, upload them, or select a whole bunch of stock images, and it's going to cycle through them. There we go, that will do. So there's my image carousel. I can edit the properties of this and change how that is laid out in terms of the aspect ratio. I can also change the layout, so I can set that to brick, carousel, which is just going to scroll through them. You just need to play around with this stuff, get used to it, and work, and find the right web part that works best for the design that you're working on. Make sure you click republish at the top when you're finished, or if you're not ready to publish it, you don't have to publish it. You can just make sure the page is saved and come back to it later. So if I come back into here and add some more text, we have been delivering, get there in the end, delivering construction projects for 100 years. And if I stop there, I can see at the top my changes are saved. So I don't have to publish this yet if I don't want everyone to see the new version I'm working on until it's completely finished. So if this is a live SharePoint site, I probably don't want to be publishing this page or the changes to my page until it's done. Otherwise, that's going to look a bit silly. But now that I've got an editing session in here, nobody else is going to be able to edit this page until I come back in and click republish. So make sure you do that when you're finished. Otherwise, you're going to have someone contacting you saying, hey, I'm trying to edit this web page, and I can see that you have it locked out for editing. So make sure you don't forget to go in and publish there when you're finished. So now that I've created this page, I'm going to republish it. So if I click back onto pages, and there's my new page, and I'm just going to copy the link to the page. So I'm going to click the 3 dots there and click copy link. And there we go. If I go back to the home page, I'm now going to edit this navigation section here. So on this page, we've got two navigation bars. The top bar is the navigation menu that you'll see across all of the sites that are connected to this hub. And the below bar here is the navigation bar unique to this specific site that we're currently on. So if I click on edit, I don't want this site contents to be visible to everybody else. I don't want this pages area to be visible. And I'm just going to click plus at the bottom there and copy and paste that link that I've just created and give it a name. So we're going to just call that about. Okay, and hit save. Now, maybe you didn't want that link there, you just wanted it on this welcome to ABC construction. So we can get rid of that if we want to by coming back in, clicking remove, or you can move it up if you wanted it to be the first thing that people see. I'm going to remove that and press save. And now I'm going to edit the page again. And on this hero web part where we've got welcome to ABC construction, I'm going to press the edit details button. And on the right hand side here, I'm going to leave the image as it is, leave the call to action. I can change that text if I want to, but we've got a call to action link right here, and I can just paste that in there. So let's click on republish. And now if I click on learn more, that's going to take me to my about ABC construction page, and I can click home to go back. It's pretty easy to work with the web pages and web parts. A lot of it's pretty self-explanatory once you understand the layout and the fact that you can drag and drop things around on the page and edit the properties of different web parts, changing images and changing links or the design. As I said, I'd encourage you to just work out with the business what they actually want on these pages, how they want it laid out. And then once you've got that mocked up, you can then go and try and build your SharePoint site using those web parts. Just have a play around and familiarize yourself with those different parts. So before we start adding more SharePoint sites to this hub, I am going to just change the look and feel, because that look and feel is going to apply to all of the other sites that I connect here. So let's click on settings, and you can go into site branding, which is quite a new feature, and that will allow you to apply your company brand colors. I'm not going to show you that in this video today. But if you had gone into site branding and created your own theme, you could then apply that from here. So I'm just going to use this red color and hit save. Okay, so that red bar has applied at the bottom. Now, if I go back in to change the look and go to header, I can apply a solid background color to the header if I want, or I can use a slightly lighter tone from that theme that I've just selected, or I can just keep that as white if that's what I prefer. So I'm going to apply a solid title there. I can turn off the site title if I don't want it, and I can also upload a thumbnail. So let's upload a thumbnail. Okay, and also a site logo. And now I'm going to click save. At the top here, I can also change the menu layout. So we can go with compact, minimal, standard. It really just depends what you like the best. I'm just going to leave it as compact for now and then hit save. Now this kind of tan colored bar at the top here, this is actually not set within SharePoint. This is a color that you will see across all of Microsoft 365. If you want to change that, if you go back into the Office 365 Admin Center and then click on Settings and Organization Settings, you've then got Organization Profile at the top and Custom Themes. So you can see here in the 365 Admin Center, I've also got that tan color. If I click on the default theme, go onto logos and colors, you can come in here and you can change the navigation bar color and also upload your corporate logos. So it's relatively easy to do. If you save that, once you're done, come back into here, you're going to see that color along the top of SharePoint as well as the rest of Microsoft 365. So it's a nice little touch to work on at the same time as rolling out your SharePoint project. And just I would encourage you to set up your site branding using your unique company brand colors. Okay, now we're ready to start adding some more sites to our hub. So let's go back to our SharePoint structure and we have got projects, sales, accounts, HR. So for this demonstration, let's just create the accounts and HR site because they have got some different things going on with the permissions there. So let's start with accounts. So we're going to go back into our SharePoint Admin Center and click new. And this time I'm going to select a team site because accounts is a team or department within my business. It's generally the best kind of layout to use. I would usually use the standard team, but you can select one of those other templates if that works better for you. It doesn't matter too much. Click Use Template, and I'm going to call this Accounts. Now, before you create this, I'm just going to remind you that the longer the site address is, the more likely it is that you are going to encounter issues with long file path restrictions for Excel and Microsoft Word. So what I'm going to do is actually change this site address and abbreviate it. Okay, so I'm just going to abbreviate that to AECC and assign a group owner to that. Now, the best thing to do is assign the person that is in charge of accounts as the group owner, but for now, I'm just going to assign myself. Okay, now because we've created a team site, this is actually going to create a Microsoft 365 group. And I'll show you that later when we get on to talking about permissions. But that's why it says group owner. It's because it's creating a Microsoft 365 group. And I can also create a Microsoft team linked to this too, if I'd like to. Now for site description, I'm going to just say accounts department SharePoint site and click next. And you can see this time around, because I have already set the default time zone now within those settings earlier on, I don't have to change it again. In terms of privacy settings for a site like this, that's going to be locked down to the accounts department, it's really important that you set the privacy to private. So let's click Create Site. I can start adding members if I want to. I'm not going to do that now. It's really important to keep in mind that if I add members in this area, it's actually going to add them to the Microsoft 365 group that gets created, and then potentially give them access to Microsoft Teams as well. So this is not the place that you should start just adding everyone that needs access to this site in the future. There's a different way of giving different people access depending on the requirements. So I recommend just forgetting this, not adding people in here, and just click Finish. Okay, so now I need to register this with a hub site. So I'm going to click on Accounts and click on Hub, associate with a hub, and join it to the hub that I created earlier. And click Save. Okay, and let's just refresh the page, make sure that's worked. Okay, so now I can actually see on the right-hand side here that the account site here is joined to the data hub there. So I can also just filter that, filter by hub, and only show sites now that are linked to that particular hub. So I'm now going to click on my account site. Okay, so we can see this had the same branding as I set on the home page earlier. Okay, so now that I've created my account SharePoint site, I can just copy and paste that link in the top and click on Data Hub and click on Add Link. And it's good. I've got an option here to add other hubs or just a label, but I just need to use the link option. Copy and paste my link, enter a display name. So we're just going to call that Accounts. You can tick that box to decide whether when people click on this link, it opens in a new tab or opens in the same browser window. And I'm going to click OK and then Save. So now I can click on Accounts at the top there, navigate between the two. You might find once you've just added a link that you have to kind of refresh the page a couple of times for it to properly stick. So let's go back to our plan and see where we're at. So we have built our hub site and we need to create one more department site. So let's really quickly do that. So we're going to create our HR site and just use the standard template. Let's call that HR site. Quite happy with that short site address there, and let's set myself as the owner. Next, happy with all of this. Create site. Not going to add any members here. Not the best place to do it. Okay, click on Finish. Just refresh the page. I need to get rid of that filter that I put on earlier so I can see the HR site, and now I need to click on it. Click on Hub and click Associate with a hub. Join that to my data hub. Click Save. And now if I click on my HR site, we've got that new site created, and you can see we've already got the data hub and accounts links there. So let's just copy that again, go back to data hub, edit the link. HR, and click OK, and then hit save. Now, one observation I've got here now is that it's not that obvious where the accounts and HR sites are. These are quite significant parts of our SharePoint structure, and they're hidden right at the top there in tiny text. So what I often do is actually create some tiles on the home page for those key SharePoint sites. So if we click on edit here, and let's create a new section. This could be the first section people see, or we can add it below this, depending on how you're going to use this. But let's put it below here. I'm just going to create a 3-column section so I can stack my tiles here. And I'm going to create an image for HR. So let's go to stock images. This will do, we can come back to it later. Okay, so now I can edit this image and paste a link there to my account site. And we've just added this text overlay over the image, and I can click there and just type accounts. Now when people click on that, so click republish, that's going to take them to the account site. So we still need to do a bit of work on the layout here. This looks a bit off. There's different ways we can play around with this. So I can add a section there and just move that into a 1-column section rather than something that takes up the whole page. We could then create a divider here to separate it. You can change the properties of that divider to make it thicker, play around with it, change the length of it, whatever works best. But you get the idea. People are going to come in here and they're going to see accounts, HR, all the different SharePoint sites, and they're just going to be able to click into them or use the navigation bar at the top. So on the account site, let's tidy up the menu. We don't want people to see anything that they just don't need. So I'm going to click edit there and remove site contents, pages, notebooks, conversations, and we've got this default documents library there. So let's hit save. And I also want to just get rid of all this stuff on the page. Now, some people don't really like this activity section because it shows the activity of people on the site, what files they've been accessing, etc. So I'm going to take that off. I'm going to take off these quick links. I'm just going to remove everything for now and hit republish. Okay, so going back to our design, on the account site, we had year-to-date accounts and payroll. We've also got this documents folder here, which for now I'm just going to hide. But this is where, if we use Microsoft Teams, all the files that are saved into that team will kind of loosely go. So I'm just going to hide that for now. Hit save, and I'm going to create 2 new document libraries. Okay, so if we click on new and then document library, and I'm going to click on blank library and give it a name. So what I'd actually recommend that you do is create this library initially with an abbreviation. So year-to-date accounts, let's just call that YTD for now and type in year-to-date accounts. We do want to show that in site navigation and click create. And now that I've done that, it's going to create it with a shorter URL, which is going to reduce our chance of having those file path issues. Because if I create year-to-date accounts, that's going to be a really long file path, and all the spaces in there are actually using 3 characters because it's a web path. So now I'm going to click on settings and library settings, and I'm going to change the name of this to year-to-date accounts and then hit save. And that's going to change the name of it, but it's not going to change the URL. And you will also just need to come in here and change the navigation link as well. So I can see there the URL is still just YTD. It's not going to change it when I rename it. And click OK and save. Okay, so we've got year-to-date accounts. Now this, by default, is just going to have the same permissions on it as the account site. So whoever's got access to the account site will have access to this. Now we want to create our payroll folder. So I need to click back onto home, click new and click document library, go to blank library again and type payroll folder. But again, actually I do want to just create that abbreviated. So let's just call that pay for now. And we've got rid of those unnecessary characters in the URL. and I'm clicked onto the payroll document library. I'm going to click on settings, library settings again, and just change that to payroll. And go back in and edit this link. So it's a really good way of reducing the number of characters in your file paths. And the classic example of why getting the planning and naming conventions from the start is essential. So if you remember this payroll library, the permissions on this need to be unique. So I'm going to click on settings in the top right there, click on library settings and click on more library settings. If I now click on permissions for this document library, and I can click on stop inheriting permissions. So that means it's no longer going to inherit the permissions that are set for the actual account site. So click on that and then OK. So it's no longer inheriting, but I also actually need to remove the permissions that were set in the first place from that site. So site visitors, that's people with read-only access, and accounts members, let's remove those. The owners of the site should always leave them everywhere, as well as kind of assume that the owners will have access to everything. And now I can grant some unique permissions. So what I recommend doing is actually creating a security group in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center for payroll. So we go into here and go to teams and groups, active teams and groups, and we're just going to create a regular security group because this group is only going to be used to manage security. So click add a security group, and I'm going to use a naming convention so that it's easy to identify. So I'm going to go with SP for SharePoint and underscroll accounts payroll and grants access to the payroll folder on the accounts SharePoint site. Let's click next. Don't need to do anything else here. Create my group and click close. Now, if I go into SharePoint and click on grant permissions, it will actually take a little while for that group that I've just created to show up. So I'm just going to use a different group for now. Let's just click on this one, and it's really important to look at the options below here. Do I really want to be sending out email invitations while I'm in the middle of setting this up? No, I don't, because people are going to start asking questions. So I'm going to untick that. There's no folders in here with unique permissions, so I'm just going to leave that ticked. And we've got set a permission level. So you could give them read-only access, read or contribute, edit access, etc. So I'm going to leave them with edit access, which will allow them to edit files, create files, and read files in that folder. And now I'm going to hit share. So now if I add people to that group, they're going to get access to this folder. Now, I'd really recommend that you do use groups to manage permissions, because otherwise it's going to get pretty messy and complicated to manage. So if I go back on here, we've now got a situation where people with the access to the account site are only going to see the homepage and the year-to-date accounts folder. And then they have to be added into the payroll folder to get access, or they have to be the owner of that SharePoint site. So I can go back into my planner, and we've created our department sites. Now, in terms of optimized site settings, one of the things I'd recommend that you do is configure your site so that when people click on a file, it opens in the desktop version of Microsoft Office. So let's go into year-to-date accounts and just create a random Word document and click, let's give that a name, test file, and let's go back and just refresh the page here. Now, if I click on this test file, by default, that is opening in the web version. You can actually change that on a document library level or for the whole site so that it opens in the desktop version of Microsoft Office. I would really encourage you to have them opening in the desktop apps, because that then makes SharePoint operate in a similar way to File Explorer. It's going to work better for people generally. So let's click on the settings, and we need to click on site information, and then view all site settings. If you go into site collection features here, we've got an option here which says open documents in client applications by default. So I activate that. All of the libraries on my site now are going to be configured to open files in the client version, the desktop version of Microsoft Office. So if I click on that file now, tick that box there so it doesn't come up again, and it's now going to open that document in Microsoft Word on my computer. Here we go. and it's streaming that file, saving my changes in real time without actually having downloaded it. Let's talk about permissions in SharePoint. So there's a number of different areas that you can set permissions, which can make it really confusing, as well as even more important to get the group set up correctly. So when you create a new SharePoint team site or a Microsoft team, this creates a Microsoft 365 group by default. That Microsoft 365 group is used to manage the permissions for the SharePoint site and the Microsoft team. So if you create a Microsoft team, that's going to create both a group and a SharePoint site. If you create a Microsoft 365 group, you can then create a team or a SharePoint site from it. And if you start by creating the SharePoint site, as I have in this scenario, that is just going to create the group and I can go back in and create a team. But all very confusing, right? The important thing to remember is now that I've created this SharePoint site, the people that I add to the Microsoft 365 group for it will get access to the whole SharePoint site, all of the documents on there, except the ones that we've broken the permissions inheritance on, like that payroll folder. And if I go and create a team from that group, they're also going to get access to that team. So really this group is for people that are part of that department or project, depending on how you've set up the site. So in the case of that account site, really only the accounts team members should be added to the accounts 365 group. You've then got the ability to add other groups directly to the SharePoint site to give people access to the site or folders on the site without giving them access to the Microsoft team or the group. So I can add a security group to the SharePoint site, and I can either add that to the top level of the site or I can add it to a folder on the site like I did with the payroll folder earlier. And you've got other departments that are going to be members of other Microsoft 365 groups. You can add their groups to that SharePoint site again without giving them access to everything else. So if we look at the accounts department as an example, if I've created that account SharePoint site, that's automatically created an accounts Microsoft 365 group for me. In a minute, I'm going to show you how to now go and add a Microsoft team to that group as well. But we're only going to add the account staff to that 365 group. If I want to give HR access to the account SharePoint site, I know that we've got a site called HR, so there is going to be a 365 group called HR with the HR team in it. And I can then add that HR group to the account SharePoint site and give them access. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. We don't have a site called directors, so we need to create a security group for directors and add them to the site. Let's take a look at how we do that. So let's go into our account site and have a look at the permissions there. So we already know that the payroll folder is locked down. So if I add HR to this account site, they're only going to see the home page and the year-to-date accounts folder. So if you click on settings at the top and then site permissions, and you see here we've got visitors, members and owners. So visitors by default will give people read-only access. Site members will give people edit access, and site owners will give people full control over the site, including the ability to manage permissions. So if I changed accounts members, for example, to read, that would drop them down into the site visitors group automatically. So we want to add HR, so I'm going to click add members. And what I want to do is share the site only. If you click add members to group, that is going to add people to the Microsoft 365 group that is associated with this team site. And that will then give them access to the Microsoft Teams, which you potentially don't want. So just to reiterate, really you only want people that are actually part of the accounts department adding to that group. So let's click share site only and search for HR. And there's my HR members group. And I don't want to send them an email because again, they're going to start asking questions if they don't know what this is about. And we want them to have edit access, or perhaps you just want them to have read access. And let's add that. So they are now showing under site members, which means they've got edit access, but they won't have access to that payroll folder. Now there is actually a way that you can check to see whether a user or group has access to a particular folder or library. Okay, let's click on the payroll folder, click on the settings and click on library settings, click on more library settings and click on permissions for this document library. Now sometimes you'll get something up here which suggests that there are people with limited access permissions. Usually that means they've got the ability to list files in folders for some reason. Doesn't mean they've got access to the files necessarily. But if we go back onto this home page and click on payroll, if I added the HR team to this expenses folder, they would show under here, under the payroll folder, with limited access permissions to the payroll folder, because they need to be able to actually see the payroll folder in order to access the contents in there. But it doesn't mean they're going to see the rest of the files and folders that they don't have access to. It just means they're going to see the payroll folder in order to access that one folder that we give them access to. So I'm just going to click check permissions to make sure that they don't have any access already. Let's click HR members and click check now. And I can see here they've got no permissions there. So I'd really recommend using this check permissions tool just to spot check at least your highly sensitive areas and make sure that you've set up everything properly. If we go back to payroll now and I click on this expenses folder, so you can actually set granular permissions on a subfolder. I'd encourage you not to go too granular with these permissions because it will start to get impossible to audit, but you can do it. Let's click the three dots here and click manage access. If we click on groups here and we click on grant access, don't want to notify them. Let's type in HR. Okay, and that's going to give them edit access. I can change that to just give them view access, or I can give them the ability to view it but not download it if I don't want them to download that data, and grant access. So now they'll be able to access this folder. And if I go back onto this permissions checker, I can now see we've got some people with limited access to this payroll folder. So if you remember, we're looking at the permissions on the payroll folder here. If I now click show users, I can see that HR members have limited access. So it doesn't mean that they've got access to all of the rest of the content in payroll. It just means they've got the ability to see that payroll folder in order to access the subfolder that they've got within there. So you'll find if I actually remove that, that's now gone, and go back onto manage access here. Click on groups, the HR team no longer have access there. You can spot check permissions on an individual folder as well. So if you click three dots, manage access, and click the three dots up there, advanced settings, and we've got the same thing up here. So I can click check permissions on that folder, type in HR, click check now, and they've got no access because I've just removed their limited access permissions from the parent folder. So it does take some getting used to. I'd recommend just watching this section of the video again. Take your time with the permissions, use that permissions checker tool. If you've got any questions about your SharePoint permissions, then feel free to reach out to me. And as I mentioned, if you do subscribe to our channel and send me a message on LinkedIn or an email, show me that you subscribed, I will happily send you a link to the free live interactive course that I'm running where you'll be able to follow along and ask questions as we go. Now we've set up our SharePoint site and now it's time to start thinking about migrating the data. One of the most important steps that I see people overlooking all of the time is training end users on how to use the platform. You need to agree as a business how Microsoft SharePoint is going to be used, when you're going to use Teams, when you're going to use OneDrive, when you're going to use the SharePoint web interface, and establish a set of governance rules around the use of the platform. You then need to train all of your end users on how to use SharePoint, but also how to use SharePoint in the way that your business wants it to be used. If you overwhelm them with options, Microsoft Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, and don't tell them when to use each app, they're going to get confused. They're going to end up saving things all over the place. On their desktop, maybe they've just completely boycotted the system because they've lost confidence in it. It's really important that you get the training and governance right. So when you're ready to start migrating your content, if you come into the SharePoint Admin Center and click on Migration, you've got a few options available to you depending on where you're migrating your data from. There are some third-party migration tools also available on the market. But if we come into the Migration Manager, we've got various options here depending on what platform that you're using. So if you're moving from on-premises file shares, you've got the option to download this tool here. That would download an agent onto the different computers or servers that you're migrating data from and allow you to map it. We've also got the SharePoint Migration tool, which is one that I personally like to use. It does say here that it's just for migrating content from SharePoint Server to Microsoft 365, but that's not actually the case. You can use it for migrating content from file servers too. So I've downloaded the SharePoint migration tool and installed it. When you install it, all it's going to do is pop up and ask you to sign into the Microsoft 365 tenant that you would like to migrate data to. So I've got a few options here. I can set up a new migration from SharePoint or a new migration from a file share. So I'm going to click on the file share and I'm going to click on single source file share, but you can also import a CSV file mapping your sources and your destinations, which is potentially an easier way to do it if you're working with a huge amount of data. But let's click on single file share. I'm just going to enter a local folder on my computer that's got a few files in it. And we've got a few options here. Migrate the selected folder and folder contents, or only migrate the contents. So if you only migrate the contents, that's just going to move the files from the folder to your selected location. If you actually want the folder and the name of the folder to be uploaded into SharePoint, so let's say we're just moving a load of folders from our accounts share on the file server into accounts on SharePoint, then we probably want to select the top option. So I'm going to select the top option and click on next, choose SharePoint as my destination, and let's pick our SharePoint site. If you enter the name of a location that doesn't exist, it is going to create it for you. But let's enter the URL for our account site and to our agent. Give that a minute and it will automatically pick up on the libraries on that site. So we've got documents and we've got payroll. And if you want to move it into a particular folder within there, then you can select one. But I want this to just go into the root top level of my year-to-date accounts folder. So I'm going to click on that and click on next. And there is our share. And if we click on next, we can add a whole load of things to this migration. I'd really recommend that you give the migration a name. So accounts folder to year-to-date accounts. If you don't give it a name, you're going to be really struggling to work out what migration is what. So you can add multiple sources into this migration batch. I'd recommend if you've got tons of data, breaking it up into batches. But let's click on next. And we've got a few options here. So we've got only perform scanning, i.e. we just want it to evaluate the migration and not actually move anything yet, so we don't want to do that. In terms of preserve file share permissions, it's only going to work if you're actually syncing your on-premises Active Directory with Microsoft 365 Entra ID. Otherwise, it just simply won't work because it's not going to recognize your Active Directory users and group in your Microsoft 365 environment. So I'm not going to tick that because I don't have a hybrid Entra Active Directory set up in place. And if we click on View All Settings and see what else we've got here, so I'm just going to scroll down, include hidden files. Yes, we want to do that. In terms of migration auto rerun, I'd recommend clicking to run that up to 5 successive times, because otherwise if it fails once because of a connection issue, it's just going to stop the whole migration. So I'm going to click on save and accept all other defaults. And I can either hit save and kick that migration off later, or I can just press start and let that run. So let's give that a few moments. Shouldn't take too long because I've only got a few files in that folder. Okay, my migration is now complete. So I can see all 3 files have migrated and that is the correct size. If anything had failed to migrate, you can click on view reports to have a look. Sometimes files fail to migrate either because they're in use or because the file path in the destination is too long. And that's why we talked about using abbreviations for the site URL and when initially creating those document libraries. But you've also got to make sure you don't have too many nested subfolders. So this has all worked fine, but if I had any issues, if I click on view reports, I can have a look at the logs and see what has failed if it had failed. So let's close this down and click on back to list. So I can see that migration is completed. I'll be able to see all of my migrations that I've set up within this tool, within this window. So if I now close that application and click on year-to-date accounts, I've now got my data folder there. So if I click in there, I've got my 3 files. I've seen people before trying to use OneDrive to sync data into SharePoint, and that's okay if you're working with a small amount of data, but it doesn't really work for working with masses of data because you cannot properly track what has correctly migrated and what has not. So if you end up with sync issues because file path is too long or whatever else, it becomes a nightmare trying to work out what has copied and what has not copied. So I'd really recommend using the SharePoint migration tool. I'd also recommend using the SharePoint migration tool if you need to move masses of data around within SharePoint. There is this move function. So if I select this folder there and click the 3 dots here and click move to, you can move it within SharePoint from here. But again, if you're working with more than a couple of hundred files, I found it to be extremely problematic. If something fails, you just have no way of knowing what has copied and what hasn't copied, and you can end up into a right mess. So really, I'd suggest using the SharePoint migration tool or having a play with the migration manager here, using the file shares or one of the other apps, depending on where you're moving from. So we've covered most of the fundamentals of setting up SharePoint there. There really are so many other SharePoint features that you can set up, such as SharePoint lists. We really want to build out some of these home pages on these sites. But this gives you the foundation that you need to get started. I'd recommend really just keeping your SharePoint sites simple to start with and then building it up from there. So I'll be doing some more videos on SharePoint and the other things that you can add to your sites. So make sure you check out our videos in the future. I hope you found that useful. And don't forget, if you subscribe to the channel and send me a message on LinkedIn or pop me an email, show me that you have subscribed, I'll give you a free link to attend a live interactive SharePoint setup training session that I am running, and you can follow along with me and ask questions. It's completely free, no strings attached. Thanks for watching.